If the author of this book lied, then the whole thing is a lie. Judaism starts like every other religion on the planet. You open up the Torah and it says in the beginning of the Torah, God spoke to Abraham. Sure. See how suspicious that is? One guy. A generation later, God speaks to Isaac. Yeah, sure, one guy. One generation later, God speaks to Jacob. Family business. Okay? Now, this looks terrible. It really looks terrible. So when you look at Judaism, it's exactly like every other religion on the planet. The initial revelation narrative is no different, and therefore, Judaism has no more credibility than any other religion on the planet initially. And they came into a field, and it was filled with mushrooms. And they started to pop those things. And then 15 minutes later, whoa, man, we hear God speaking! Woo! It was a mass drug trip.
Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Aaron Sokol, and you're watching Parsha Inspired. Who wrote the Torah? Did Israel invent Moses? The evidence is insane. Check out this great clip here of Rabbi Kellerman. We'll watch it together, then talk about it. Let's dive in.
What exactly happened at Mount Sinai 3,300 years ago? In other words, is that mythology? Is that a real historical event? What exactly happened? I'm going to start off with the broadest picture, which is a discussion of how religions start generally. Or you could say, what is the credibility of religions generally? When you look at any religion on the planet, and for my undergraduate degree, I studied about 165 major religious families that included thousands of sects and cults. What I discovered is that all religions on the planet begin when one or two people have some sort of transcendental experience, a revelation or some other sort of experience, and then those one or two people convey that experience to others who are very moved by the revelation narrative, and then those people then follow them and access the wisdom through those one or two leaders. That's usually how religions get going. When you ask a religion, what do you have to offer? So every religion will describe various benefits that you'll get if you join that religion, and then you say, well, can I get those exact same benefits if I join that other religion? Instead of joining your religion, if I join that religion, will I get those benefits? So invariably, the founders of the religion will tell you no. For example, if you accept Jesus, you'll be saved. So now ask a Christian, well, I'm not going to accept Jesus, I'm going to become a Hindu. Will I be saved? So the answer is no. I mean, that you just have to be honest. The answer is no. And if you become a Hindu, you'll gain control over certain aspects of nature. You can actually rise above the forces of nature and actually gain control over those forces of nature. And if you ask someone in a Hindu sect, tell them, listen, I'm not going to become a Hindu. I decided instead I'm going to become a Jew. Will I gain control over nature in that way? And they'll honestly tell you no. We have a unique technology here. And the same is true by every religion. Whatever benefits they grant you, Buddhism will grant you an unparalleled sense of oneness with the universe. You can become essentially a deity. You can achieve this essentially divine state of being B-U-D-D-H-A. And that state of divinity cannot be achieved. You can't pass through the 8th stage of transic insight unless you actually follow the path that was laid out by Siddhartha Gautama. That's the only way to get there. So when you say to these people, well, listen, the technology that you're offering me, the system that you're providing for me is obviously not obvious, because if it was obvious, everybody in the world would be doing this. So where did you get it? Then they will tell you their revelation narrative. And every religion has a revelation narrative, and invariably the revelation narrative is one or two people have this experience and get everyone else to follow. Just to give you some examples of things that you're already familiar with, I'm lecturing now in a Christian country. So most of us here are very, very familiar with Christianity. And most people who have studied Christianity realize that Christianity does not begin, the Christianity that we possess today does not begin with Jesus. Even the Catholic Church, which is the oldest of the churches today, does not begin with Jesus. It begins with Paul. And the story is that Jesus lived, Jesus died. About 35 years later, after Jesus died, he was walking alone on the road to Damascus. And walking alone on the road, suddenly, 35 years after Jesus died, he has this vision and Jesus appears to him. And Jesus tells over all the stories of the miracles that he experienced when he was alive. And Paul is so moved by this. His name actually was Shaul. He was actually a Jew. Shaul is so moved by this that he converts on the spot, changes his name to Paul, goes back into the city, tells all the people that he's become a Christian and that Jesus is the way, and if you accept Jesus, you'll be saved, and tells over the stories of that Jesus told him. And he then sits down and writes more than half the books of the New Testament, including all of the books of the New Testament that contain the miracle stories about Jesus. So it turns out that, and then those stories are passed down, those Pauline documents are passed down from about 65 CE down to about 325 CE, and 325 CE, they all get gathered together at the Council of Nicaea, along with other fragments that were written based on the Pauline documents. All of those are put together into the New Testament. It's codified into the New Testament, and Christianity is up and running. So it turns out that if Paul told the truth, the whole thing is true, and if Paul lied, the whole thing is a lie. Or if Paul had a trip, or whatever the case is. The entire credibility of religion rests on Paul. Now, that doesn't mean that Christianity is not true. It just means that the credibility of the religion rests on the credibility of one person. That's the key. And the same is true by Buddhism with Siddhartha Gautama, who ascends to the 8th stage of transic insight, comes to know all there is to be known, descends back into his body again, stands up, begins his 45-year career as a leader and teacher, and gives over the ways of Buddhism to people. Now, if Siddhartha Gautama actually ascended and became a Buddha, then in fact the whole thing is true. And if he made that up, or if he fantasized, or had some other sort of hallucinogenic experience, so then the whole thing is not true. So it's true, it's not true. We're not really addressing that issue. What we are pointing out, though, is that there has never been somebody since Siddhartha Gautama who achieved the 8th stage of transic insight. There's never been anyone else who's achieved that state. By the way, before Siddhartha Gautama, there were 44 other people. 45 people actually did this before Siddhartha Gautama. They ascended also, but the thing is, they never came back down again. The only one who came back down was Siddhartha Gautama. So how do we know about the other 44? Take a wild guess. He told us. And would he lie? So it must be true. Okay, now again, I'm not telling you that it's not true. What I'm pointing out, though, is it's an interesting coincidence that all religions on the planet begin with this transcendental experience experienced by one or two people. What I concluded when I saw this was that one of two things is true. Either, for some reason, God is very shy, and so he only appears to one or two people at a time. Or the other possibility is that, and this is what we teach in university, the ability to maintain a conspiracy is inversely proportional to the number of people involved. So as the number of people involved climbs, the likelihood of that religion surviving drops geometrically. Without going into any of the heavy math, but I'll give you a very simple model for how this principle works. Let's say that you have one person who starts a cult. I start a cult, and I tell all of you I had this experience. Okay, now, there are two possible scenarios. One scenario is that throughout the rest of my life, I say to you, I swear the whole thing is true. In which case, in that first scenario, there is a chance this religion could survive. The second possibility is that somewhere along the line, I confess to you, hey, I made the whole thing up. At which point, the entire religion explodes. So, excluding psychological and sociological factors, since there are two possible scenarios and the religion can only survive in one of them, that means there's a 50-50 chance that this religion will survive, okay, with one person who's involved in founding it. Okay, now, skip to two people. Let's say you have two people. So if you have two people, there are four possible scenarios. In the first scenario, both guys say, it's true, yeah, it's true, in which case the religion survives. Second scenario, one guy says, it's true, and the other guy says, what do you mean, we just made it up in the other room a few minutes ago, in which case the religion explodes, right? Third scenario, the first guy says, haha, we made it up, and the second guy says, shh, we're trying to start a religion here, in which case the religion explodes. Third scenario, both guys with arms over each other's shoulders say, haha, we made it up, in which case the religion explodes. It turns out, of the four possible scenarios, when you've got two people launching a religion, only one will allow the religion to survive. Okay, the equation that we use is the ability to maintain a conspiracy is defined by 1 over 2 to the n, where n is the number of conspirators. So therefore, if you've got 3 people who launch a religion, there's a 1 out of 8 chance the thing will survive. You get 4 people launching a religion, there's a 1 out of 16 chance the religion will survive. 5 people's 1 out of 32, etc. That's why you've never heard of religion that was launched when 5 people had a transcendental experience. Because the odds of that thing making it are infinitesimal. Okay, now, zooming back again. Every religion on the planet starts with 1 or 2 people. Not surprising. Okay, then you get to Judaism. Okay, now, Judaism starts like every other religion on the planet. You open up the Torah and it says in the beginning of the Torah, God spoke to Abraham. Sure. See how suspicious that is? One guy. A generation later, God speaks to Isaac. Yeah, sure, one guy. One generation later, God speaks to Jacob. Family business. Okay? Now, this looks terrible. It really looks terrible. So when you look at Judaism, it's exactly like every other religion on the planet. The initial revelation narrative is no different, and therefore, Judaism has no more credibility than any other religion on the planet initially. Then, skip forward a few chapters. You get to a very unique scene in terms of the academic study of religions. It catches everybody's attention. It's discussed on every university campus. In the second book of the Bible, in the book of Exodus, in the chapter called Yitro, there is a scene, this is the first place it appears, but then it appears over and over again throughout the book. There's a scene in which the Jews have escaped from Egypt. We have a tally. There was at least 603,000 adult men between the ages of 20 and 50. You add up all the numbers, it turns out there were about 3 million people who walked out of Egypt. They arrive at the foot of Mount Sinai, and there the text explicitly says that they heard God speak. 3 million people heard God say, I'm the Lord your God, you should have no other gods before me. Moses, come up to the top of the mountain, I'm going to give you the Torah. Okay? Now that is far out. You never have a religion that starts with 3 people, let alone 3 million. All the academics, they say, okay, there's something unusual going on. Now, by the way, right after that, after God has said, I'm the Lord your God, you should know the gods before me, Moses, come up to the mountain. Moses goes up, he's up there alone, he gets the Torah, he brings it down, he says, okay, folks, this is what I got on top of Mount Sinai. So that looks very suspicious again. Yeah, who knows what he was doing up there? Okay, but in the initial launch, you've got 3 million people hearing God speak, 3 million people experiencing prophecy. This is the first, I won't say the last, but it's the first mass revelation in recorded human history. Okay. Now, speaking as a university professor, I will tell you what we do in order to destroy Jewish credibility, in order to knock Judaism down to look like every other religion on the planet. Because, listen, we got a problem on the table. You don't want to face the number 1 over 2 to the 3 million. Yeah? The odds that this thing is a lie are like, it's impossible that it could be a lie. 1 out of 2 to 3 million, it looks extraordinarily credible. So then the university professor goes to work, and in 2 seconds I will destroy Judaism. It happens very, very quickly. Here's how it works. 3 million people heard God speak. Where did you get that? So you say, well, it says so in the Torah. So I say, who wrote this? She said, one person wrote that. So now we've actually gotten back to essentially the Buddhist model. In Buddhism, you've got 45 people who ascended to the 8th stage of transic insight. But how do we know that? Through one fellow. So you've got this massive event, but the whole massive event is only being passed to you through one guy. If the author of this book lied, then the whole thing is a lie. And if the author of this book told the truth, then the whole thing is true. Now, in the university circles, the way that we explain where this book came from is we don't say it was one guy. There's technical problems with saying it was one guy. So if you would go to a Jewish studies department at any mainstream university, at Harvard, at Yale, at UCLA, any of these places, what you will hear is it was not written by one person. It was written by 4 people. It was written by J, E, P, and D. These are 4 authors. They call them by those names. You'll see in a moment why. And then it was redacted by a 5th person who mixed everything together and produced this document. J is called J because there are places in the Torah where the tetragrammaton, a 4-letter name of God, is used. When they try to pronounce that 4-letter name of God, Yud and Hey and then Vav and Hey, it sounds like it begins with a J. And so they call the author who used that name the J author. The only thing is the Torah uses many names for God. The tetragrammaton, the 4-letter name, is one of them. There's another name which you probably have heard before, Elohim. Elohim, that reference was written by the E author. So you have the J author, the E author who writes about Elohim. Then there's the P author. The P author is the one who stressed the importance of the priestly duties. And there's major sections in the book that talk just about the importance of the priests. So he was the one who wrote that. And then finally, you have the D author. That's the Deuteronomist who comes at the end of the book. Okay, now the problem is, modern scholars discovered the people who put this theory together were not fluent in Hebrew. Modern scholars discovered that, in fact, in one sentence, you can have the J name, the E name. It could be discussing priestly duties, and it could be in the book of Dvarim, of Deuteronomy. So that blows the whole theory to pieces. How could it all be in one spot if it was four different authors? So they came with this other idea that a fifth guy came and redacted the whole thing and mixed it all up, and so now you can have it all mixed together. So on university campus today, they say this is a book that was written by 5 people, J, E, P, and D, redacted by R. God has nothing to do with it. It's cultural history. That's the approach that's used. And now we've solved the problem. 3 million people heard God speak. It's not true, they'll tell you. 3 million people didn't hear God speak. It's a mythology written by 5 people. Okay, that's the end of the university course. This is where I step in. Okay, this is the beginning of the lecture. We're all on the same page now. What I'm about to do is, I'm about to explain, I'm going to assume that this whole thing is a lie, that this is really a mythology, that in fact God never wrote this. And I'm going to run with that theory as far as I can until it gets into trouble. And you'll see as the theory starts to stumble. Let's assume that a liar or liars, a group of charismatic cult leaders, put this thing together. And they wrote up the story about the mass revelation. If that is in fact what happened, then when they told people, either handed them the book or orally explained to them, that, hey, you know, God spoke to 3 million people. The charismatic cult leader or leaders who told that lie had to place that event of mass revelation somewhere in human history. I'm arguing that the original lie had to take one of 3 forms. That is, there's only 3 times in human history where they could have argued that, in fact, this mass revelation took place. Again, just to clarify, I'm running with the assumption of the secular biblical critic that the book is not from God. According to him, a charismatic cult leader sold the Jews on the story. I want to go back to that moment historically when the charismatic cult leader stands up in front of a group of people and says to them, hey folks, God spoke to all the Jews at Mount Sinai. Then they say, really, when? And he gives one of the following 3 answers. I'll start with the simplest model. The simplest model is called the present model, or the present lie. In the present lie, the charismatic cult leader says, which generation heard God speak? It was you. All of you were sitting here today. And of course, we're going back to an event that's taking place 500 or 1,000 or 1,500 years or 2,000 years ago, whenever it was. I'm the charismatic cult leader. You're the people who were around at that time. And I'm telling you, you all just heard God speak. You heard him say these words. You heard him say, I'm the Lord your God. You should know the gods before me. Moshe, Moshe, come up to the mountain. Then I went up on the mountain. I got this book. I brought it down, and I brought it down to give it to you. And I hand you the book, and you're so blown away by my charisma that you all cried in unison, Amen! And the thing is up and running. Okay, now, the reason why this is called the present lie is, in this theory, which generation does he claim heard God speak? Present generation, which is why it's called present. Very simple. Okay. Okay, let's leave the present for a moment. Let's move over to the, everyone's with me so far? Yeah, let's move over to the past lie. In the past lie, past theory, the charismatic leader comes to a group of people and he says to them, you heard nothing because God never spoke to any of you. But long ago, there was a great mountain called Sinai, and all of your ancestors were there. And there, God settled on the mountain, and God spoke to all of your ancestors. He said, I'm the Lord your God. You should have no other gods before me. Moshe, Moshe, come up to the mountain. There was a great prophet there by the name of Moses. Moses ascended. He got the Torah. He brought it down. He gave it to the Jews. They all accepted it. Judaism was up and running. And Judaism has been running. Now, if I tell you it's been running ever since then until you're not going to believe me. Why? It's a lie. And you know it's a lie because you say to your parents, hey, I just came from this lecture and this guy told me that there's this religion called Judaism started by Moses and all of our ancestors were all religious Jews. Mom, Dad, I don't remember you guys being religious Jews. They say, religious what? I never heard of this thing before. In which case, I sink. So therefore, if you want to argue past theory, the charismatic cult leader will not say that this tradition was passed down from Mount Sinai 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago, or when it was all the way down to your family. He'll say that at Mount Sinai, all the Jews became religious, and they were religious for 2 or 3 generations. But then there was a terrible, okay, now insert whatever you want, flood, assimilation, disease, war, right? The entire tradition was fumbled. They lost it. Everyone forgot about the Mount Sinai event, and no one in your family has known anything about the Sinai event until today, when I, Frank, have come to give you back the Torah. Then I hand you this book claiming this is your long-lost heritage that has been not known by anyone in your family for 1,000 or 2,000 years. Then you ask, well, how did you get it? And I say either it was passed only in my family, or I say God came to me last night and he told me the story and I'm giving it to you because he told it to me. Whatever the case is, I hand you the book, and again, you're so blown away by my charisma that you all cry out in unison, amen, and the thing is up and running. Okay, so again, in present theory, the charismatic leader says, which generation heard God speak? The present generation. In the past theory, the charismatic leader says, which generation heard God speak? It wasn't you, it was a past generation. And you knew nothing about it until I told you about it. Okay? Everyone's with me so far? Present, past. Okay, now you know what the next one's going to be called. Okay? We go over here. The next one's called future. And in the future lie or the future theory, what happens is the charismatic cult leader comes to a group of people and he says to them, you heard nothing. And why did you hear nothing? Because God never spoke to you, but God never spoke to your ancestors. Because God has not yet spoken. 5 words. But someday, all of your descendants will gather at the foot of a great mountain, Sinai. And there there'll be a great prophet, Moses. And God will say, I'm the Lord your God. You should have known the gods before me. Moses, come up to the mountain. Moses will go up. He'll get the Torah. He'll bring it down. And I happen to have an advanced copy right here. I then hand you the book, and you're so blown away by my charisma that you all cry out in unison. Amen. Amen. And we're up and running. Okay, good. Now, understand the intellectual integrity of the argument that I just made. I'm claiming that if this book is a lie, the original lie that was told by the charismatic cult leader had to take only one of 3 forms. He either had to say, you all heard God speak, present theory, your ancestors heard God speak, past theory, or your descendants will hear God speak, future theory. There is no other lie he could have told, because where else is he going to place that event of mass revelation besides the past, the present, and the future? Clear? Everyone's on board? Yeah? What I'm saying is so simple, you can't believe I'm actually making a point out of this. I'll show you why I'm stressing it. There are now only 3 possible lies that could have launched Judaism. What happens if I show you that for technical reasons, the future lie could never have worked? Then I would know that the lie called Judaism was launched either using the present or the past mythology. Okay. But what happens if I show you that not only the future lie couldn't have worked, but the present lie couldn't have worked either? Then we'll know that the original liar told a story that was the past lie. And that's how Judaism got launched. But what happens if I show you that the past lie couldn't have worked either? If the past lie, the present lie, and the future lie, if none of these lies could have launched Judaism, then what's the other alternative?
It's the truth.
Right. It's the truth. And that is going to be the path that I'm about to follow. In part 1 of this lecture, there'll be 2 parts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to point out a small problem with the future lie, a small problem with the present lie, and a small problem with the past lie. When we see how difficult it would have been for any of these lies to have successfully launched Judaism, and given that these are the only lies that could have launched Judaism, think, well, there's no lie that could have launched this religion. But the religion is launched, which means it wasn't launched by a lie. Okay, that's part 1. Okay, then, in part 2, I'm going to drop a bomb, which, in one fell swoop, will take out past, present, future, and any other theory you ever hear ever in your life. In other words, any explanation for how this thing could possibly not be from God dissolves in light of the bomb, which is coming in part 2.
So, and that leads us to the real question. Before we get to the answer to Rabbi Kellerman's question, we're going to play the bomb at the very end of the video. But I really want to get to the core of why someone is asking the question. You see, the world is obsessed with Israel and the Jewish people. Now, there's a lie that's being spread today, and that is anti-Semitism. And I don't mean that anti-Semitism is a lie, which it is, but I mean that the hate that is being experienced by the Jewish people today in media relates to Israel. Iran's hate towards Israel is as a nation living in this land, not as the Nazis did. And this is something that needs to be called out. And when Jews continually call this anti-Semitism, they're doing a disservice to the people making these claims, because they're being very clear. This is not about anti-Semitism. This is about a promise made in Deuteronomy that God will exile the Jewish people and return them to this land. And furthermore, he says that this land will not produce fruit until they come back. And these ruins will not be built up until the Jewish people come into this land and bring in its holiness. And the world witnessing these events unfold, as it says they will unfold in Ezekiel 38. And as the Jews come back, like it says in Jeremiah 49, and they come back to the land cries and weeps out and asks for the people to come. But it's all so that all nations in the world will bend their knees towards God. That was the reason why we had this revelation at Sinai. The Sinai revelation wasn't necessary. It was given to the world as a gift. We'll watch the final clip at the end. But for now, to ignore that anti-Semitism, or what's being labeled as anti-Semitism, is actually rewriting the Torah. And I'll explain. One of the biggest comments I get, I have a second channel called Living Inspired. I'm going to try to publish over there more secular content so that I don't put that content in this channel. I'll try to keep it more Torah focused and Torah based. But the question of who the Jewish people are, if they actually are the people who are mentioned in the Torah, that comes up a lot. Who are the Jews? The word Jews is a made-up term. And what I've gathered from these conversations was that if, in fact, what we terminize the Jews is the people of the Torah, and we have come back, and the Torah was authored by God, this poses a theological problem to Islam and Christendom. And that is the core of the issue. So if you're asking the question of who wrote the Torah, if the narrative that has been predicted has been fulfilled, if the prophecies that were told to Isaiah and to Ezekiel and to Jeremiah and to Daniel are all coming true, and we're all here in the land, and it's happening. So this actual question of who wrote the Torah is the question of the Messianic era. Because it's only when what is written in the Torah will happen, happens, and the predictions that are there come true, you got to go back and read the book again. And therefore, my listeners, I really encourage you that with the coming holiday of Shavuot, the time when God revealed himself to the world, and the entire world ultimately cannot deny this revelation. And the purpose of the revelation was that every person should understand that the Torah, like its name, is a book of instructions. And the instructions are for humanity. It is an ethical way, but we should be following it because it is God's will, not because it's just ethical. When a person refrains from transgressing one of the 7 Noahide laws, he should remember that it's simply because God told me to act in His godly way. And therefore, the question of who wrote the Torah would only be relevant if the requirements in the Torah and the promises in the Torah don't match up. But when God says that when you do the will of God, He gives you an equation, and He tells us the narrative of the Jewish people, and it all comes true, and it all happens, and we are in fact in the Messianic times. We're in unbelievable times, unfathomable times. And we see how from Zion, from this holy land that I'm sitting in right now, Torah is being spread. The fact that I'm able to sit here and spread Torah from Zion, and that verse that says, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, that the Torah will come from Zion, that verse, that Torah that was coming out to the nations of the world, that the entire world should throw away their false idols. And God doesn't need an intermediary. And if you ask, and if you comment, what is the name Jew? Well, I'll tell you it's very simple. Judah, he wasn't the firstborn. In fact, he was the fourthborn. He was the fourthborn of Jacob's first wife, who he didn't really want to marry, Leah. He didn't really want to marry her. He really wanted Rachel, Joseph. He really wanted Joseph. And he had to wait a long time until Joseph was finally born. But Judah and Joseph, Judah was the fourthborn from Leah. And he got his name because Leah knew that Jacob had 4 wives, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zilpah. And Rachel didn't have children, and Leah now had her 4th child. And she said, I will name him Judah. And the word Judah means to admit, to give thanks, to give praise, to admit the truth. That's what Jews do. In fact, all we've done throughout our history, the Jewish people have not been held together by a country. This may seem strange, me saying that. But the Jews have been held together by the Torah. The Torah's instructions are to come to Eretz Yisrael. That's without a doubt. But the Torah held them together by them studying it. Ta'am ur'u, taste the Torah, and you will know. It's the personal experience. They've taught and learnt this Torah critically for thousands and thousands of years. That's all the Jews have done throughout the generations. And the books that we have, the brilliant works that we have of scholars who lived 1,000 and 2,000 years ago. What other nation has schools of academy of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Jews daily studying one text? Another comment I get is that the Talmud is made up. Because it's made up by rabbis, the 7 laws are made up by rabbis. So I want to tell you that the Or HaChaim HaKadosh, who's buried in Har HaZeisim, he says the following question. We know that Rabbi Akiva knew things that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know. And in fact, I heard from Rav Mordechai Becher that the New York Times once took out a full-page ad. He remembers it, I didn't see it, and it was done by the Reform movement. And it said that if Rabbi Akiva could know things that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know, then perhaps we can know things that Rabbi Akiva didn't know. And therefore, the Or HaChaim asks the question, how is it possible, if Moses received the Torah at Sinai, that Rabbi Akiva could know things that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't know? And here lies something fundamental, and then we'll get to Rabbi Kellerman's bomb, and we'll finish off with maybe another clip. Here's where it gets the inside secret that the Or HaChaim reveals. He says that the function of the Torah, and this I heard from Rav Becher originally, over 30 years ago. The function of the Torah is not, the function of the Talmud is not to figure out what to do. In fact, we know what to do, we know what an esrog looks like, and we know what a mikvah looks like, and we know what tefillin look like, and we know how to do shechita, how to do the ritual slaughtering. We know all these things not because they're written in the Talmud or because they're written in the Torah. They are in fact not written in the Torah. I remember his joke was that on Yom Kippur, all it says, V'inisem es nafshei seichem. You should torture yourself. So he said, what should we do? Read Russian novels and roll on thumbtacks? And achbar u mikvei mayim yetar. Just a pit should be pure. And when Yigal Yadin, the famous archaeologist, went up to the top of Masada, found what was then the oldest mikveh ritual bath in Israel, they brought the chief rabbi up from Jerusalem in a helicopter, and he stood inside of the ritual bath, and he had with him a measuring tape, and he measures up and down, and he determines that it's a kosher mikveh. And Yigal Yadin says, this is unbelievable. Here you have a situation where very little information was given in the Torah of what this is. And yet, for thousands of years, the Jews have analyzed the laws of mikveh and gone through hundreds and thousands of arguments and details. And yet, they're using the measuring tape of today to determine what was already a fact back then. So Or HaChaim says that what we do, the Mishnah doesn't say that we read Kriya Shema. It says Me'emesai Kairinesa Kriya Shema. From what time? The Mishnah doesn't tell us specifics of what we do. It asks the details of how we do it. We know that we have tefillin. These things are passed down. And even, interestingly enough, in Masada they had found tefillin of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam. Just as an aside. So Rabbeinu Tam didn't wake up one day and make up a new tefillin. So what the Or HaChaim is saying is that we're not trying to figure out what to do, but we're actually trying to figure out how to do it. Once we understand this Or HaChaim, that the Torah was given over to the Jewish people, and in fact, the first mitzvah that we were given was the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, of the new moon. You'll ask, what does that mean? Well, it means that God has given over the keys to this universe to the Jewish people. And in this universe, the truth is determined by what we decide. If we decide today is Rosh Hashanah, then today is Rosh Hashanah. Obviously, they would have to do it according to what they saw. Now, this power that the Jewish people have was the reason why Isaiah said, and God spoke to Isaiah and called the Jewish people his creator. Because in fact, we can determine the new moon, and the Kohen was given the power to say kosher and non-kosher. And we have that power collectively to determine when Mashiach comes. We can decide that Mashiach should come this year. It's up to us. Hashem gave us the keys. Vayirach Yaakov Yitzrayach Yisrael. He gave us the keys. So let's do it. Let's see what we can take on this Shavuos in accepting the Torah. What that means is that I understand the rules inside of it. To learn the Torah and not follow what it says in it is to ignore the entire purpose of learning. It's lilmod ulelamed lishmar v'lasos. It's to learn and teach, to guard and to do. Eretz Yisrael is the place where we do. It's the place of action. This week, we started the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. The Zohar says that this book separates ben chaylen d'oraisa lachaylen d'mashkana, between the soldiers who were out Mount Sinai, who witnessed the great miracles but fell so quickly in the desert. The Torah was given in the desert so all nations should understand that it's for humanity. But yet, the mission of the Jews, which they started from the moment that they received the Torah, the moment they received the Torah, they had one mission, which was to come to Eretz Yisrael. And today, that mission is happening. It's finally happening. We are halfway done. We are the Jewish people. The Torah gave us the power to decide what Hashem does. Our actions, the way we behave, the way we speak, and the way we act between us and God, between us and our neighbors, and even between us and the animals of this world. The way we behave is the decision that will change this world forever. For now, we're in Eretz Yisrael. The heart of the Jewish people has returned. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah, the Torah is coming out of Jerusalem. So now we're going to listen to the ending of Rabbi Kellerman, The Bomb, and I'll meet up with you one more time at the end of that video. We'll talk a little bit about it. Thank you for watching. Let's go on.
The bomb. Okay. Now, what I just did was child's play. The bomb is 1,000 times more powerful. Watch. Imagine the following. I pull out of my pocket a solid gold, 14-karat gold pen. And I show you, folks, this is no ordinary pen. This baby writes with solid gold ink, 14-karat gold ink. So you say, Kellerman, that's amazing. But where did you, a university professor, get one of those? So I explained, on my salary, we really can't afford these. What I did was, I used this handy-dandy chemical formula for performing alchemy, and I performed alchemy. I transformed what was once blue and clear plastic into pure solid gold. So you say, really? You're not lying to us? No. Would I lie to you? Of course not. So you say, really? Could I borrow that formula for a few minutes? And you grab the formula, which I claim contains all of the elements of how to perform this procedure, and you make copies of this thing and you hand it out to 100 physicists and chemists. And you say to them, Kellerman claims he performed alchemy, turned plastic into gold. We want to know if he's lying or telling the truth. Check it out. You hand this thing out, and 100 teams of physicists and chemists attempt replication. They try to perform the exact same experiment I claim that I performed. They try it every single day, 365 days a year for 10 years. And after 10 years, all 100 teams come back, they throw the thing on the table, and they say, it didn't work. Okay, now, be calm and rational. What do you conclude? When I claimed that I turned plastic into gold, was I lying or telling the truth?
Lying.
Clearly, I was lying. How do you know?
Couldn't prove it.
Right. They attempted to replicate it, didn't work. Okay, now, let me slow your brain down and show you how you came to the conclusion I was lying. You're 100% correct. Every person in this room believes in scientific method. The backbone of scientific method is anything that's natural will happen more than once. I can't claim that, I got lucky. Your 100 scientists didn't get lucky. Doesn't work that way. There's 4 basic forces in the universe. There's gravity, electromagnetism, the nuclear strong force, the nuclear weak force. That's it. You have 4 basic forces. They never change their strengths. Gravity is always the same strength. You know that gravity is not more powerful on Earth than it is on the moon. Just the moon has more mass, so therefore it has a stronger pull. But gravity, that force, is always the same. The nuclear strong force, the nuclear weak force, they never change their strength. We send men to the moon based on that they will never change their strengths. And matter is matter. It doesn't go anyplace. It can become energy. It's a different form of matter. But the amount of matter and energy in the universe is constant, right? The law of conservation of mass and energy. It never increases, never decreases. So if you have the 4 basic forces that never change their strengths, and matter is matter and energy is energy, every single time you perform an experiment, you should get the exact same result. Every single time that I let go of this book, it will fall down. At least under these circumstances. Now, if you change the physical circumstances, you put a very powerful vacuum up there and flip that thing on, then maybe when I drop the book, it'll go up. But under these physical circumstances, every time I perform this experiment, it will drop down. Natural things happen more than once. Okay. This idea that natural things happen more than once is thoroughly accepted in every area of science, in the soft sciences and in the hard sciences. The hard science would be physics, chemistry, etc., astronomy. The soft sciences would be the sciences of the mind, things like psychology, history, religions. The sciences of the mind also believe that natural things happen more than once. For example, I have a book on my shelf called The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 4. I think they're up to 4B now. But the DSM-4. The DSM-4 lists everything that could psychologically go wrong with an individual. The book is that thick. Okay, now what's astounding is that with billions of people on this planet, the book is only that thick. There's only that many ways the human mind can malfunction. Why? Because brain chemistry has parameters. And so you got a lot of interesting stuff popping around your head, but you don't have hydrochloric acid up there. Yeah? In other words, your brain is different than every other brain in this room, but by very small percentages. And because brain chemistry has parameters, therefore, you only react within certain parameters. So for example, you have somebody who's walking by a bush, and I jump out from behind the bush and I go, boo! So the person might go, ah! The person might go, hoo-ah, ha! Yeah? But they're not going to go, right? They don't do that. That's not how people react. So within psychology, we have the exact same phenomena happening over and over and over and over and over again. Within history, the exact same scenarios happen over and over and over again, so much so that historians have a 3-word algorithm that describes patterns in history. They say history repeats itself. And it does. In generic themes, it does. Now, of course, there was never another Napoleon who was short with a big nose who led a war of liberation. Yeah? Fine. But if you want to see wars of liberation parallel to, let's say, the French Revolution, I can show you 100 in history. The reason why you don't have another Napoleon is because what are the odds that in only, let's say, 5,000 years of comprehensive human history, we're going to discover another guy by the name of Napoleon? But if you had enough time, if you had an infinite amount of time, we would expect there to be more Napoleons in history. Because history does repeat itself. It's possible there to be one guy who's named Napoleon, eventually someone else will come up with another name by the name of Napoleon. It'll happen again. History repeats itself. Just as natural things happen more than once in history, and natural things happen more than once in psychology and in all the hard sciences, natural things happen more than once when it comes to the study of religion. For example, every religion on this planet begins when 1 or 2 people have a mass revelation and persuade everyone else to follow. Have a private revelation and persuade everyone else to follow. That's a common pattern. All religions begin that way. Okay. I'm now going to arm the bomb. Once it's armed, I will slide it off my table into your lap. I will warn you right beforehand, and then it will detonate. Okay? Watch. If it is normal for a religion to start with a story about 3, 4, 5, 10, 100 people hearing God speak, if that's a normal, natural phenomenon, it should happen more than once. to illustrate that point, consider the following. Is it normal and natural for someone to get away with a lie that a divine creature impregnated a woman and she gave birth to a miraculous child? Is that a lie that someone could get away with? So the answer is yeah. How do I know? Well, Christianity's got it. The Greek mythologies have got it. It repeats over and over and over and over again. I can name a dozen religions that have that mythology. Okay. Is it normal to get away with a lie that a man ascended to the heavens, achieved great wisdom, and then came back down to earth to tell everybody else about the wisdom he had achieved? Yeah, it's easy to get away with that lie. Buddhism did it. Scientology did it. Joseph Smith didn't ascend, but essentially he did it. Right? I can name a dozen religions where a guy told a lie about ascending and then coming down and great wisdom. You can get away with that lie. Can you get away with a lie? The 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 people heard God speak words. And then those people survived to talk about it. Can you get away with that lie? Well, the easiest way to find out is, well, see if anyone does. Is there any other religion on the planet that makes that claim? So now, at this point, unless you actually have a master's or a PhD in religions, you won't know, but don't trust me. Go do your research. Yeah, today we've got Google, the whole world is at your fingertips. Go check it out. See if there's another religion on the planet anywhere that claims that more than 2 people heard God speak. And if it never, ever, ever happens in history, then it's not normal and natural. Okay? Now, the bomb is armed. I'm going to slide it off my table into your lap. Here we go. This is the dramatic conclusion. Watch this. You leave here tonight, and you call up one of your friends, and you say, oh, yeah, it was better than Criminal Minds. Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, a guy made a rational argument that, in fact, God spoke to the Jews at Mount Sinai. Your friend says, what are you talking about? Are you crazy? So, yeah, he said, this whole thing couldn't have started. This mythology that all these Jews believed throughout history, realize every person in this room descends, is either a convert or descends from somebody who believed in the Sinai revelation. Because until 200 years ago, there was no such thing as Reform or Conservative or all those movements that exist. Everybody 200 years ago believed this thing. So everyone here descends from somebody who at some point believed it. By the way, you can check that. Go open up a history book and see what Jews believed 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. So there's no way that story could have gotten launched, you say to your friend, unless God spoke to the Jews. Friend says, oh, that's crazy. Could have been launched in a million different ways, naturally. So you say, really? Tell me one. So your friend says, I'll tell you what it was. When they left Egypt. So what, did they have 1 box of matzah? How much food could they carry? So whatever, after 3 weeks, they were starving. And they came into a field, and it was filled with mushrooms. And they started to pop those things. And then 15 minutes later, whoa, man, we hear God speaking. Woo! It was a mass drug trip. Okay, so you say, wow, I never thought about that. When your friend suggests that, ask your friend 3 questions. Question number 1. Is it normal and natural for a group of people on drugs to hear God speak and all think he's saying the same thing? At Woodstock, they all heard God speak, but they didn't think he was saying the same thing. Yeah? Is it normal for them all to think God's saying the same thing? So your friend says, yeah, that could happen. That's normal, that's natural. Sure, that could happen. Question number 2. Do normal, natural things happen more than once? Friend says, I believe in scientific method. Sure. Normal, natural things happen more than once. Question number 3. Can you name one other religion in history that ever made a claim that more than 2 people heard God speak? If it was normal, natural, it should happen more than once. Why was there another group that took drugs and all thought they heard God speaking? Lots of people take drugs. So your friend says, no, it wasn't a drug trip. I'll tell you what it was. It was They were walking through the desert, and there was this wind blowing by this cliff, and it made this noise of like, "Rah." And Moses got on top of this thing and stood there with a megaphone, and he cried out, "I'm the Lord your God, you know the gods before me." And they thought it was God. It was like, it was wind and thunder, and so they thought it was God. So you say, wow, I never thought about that. Let me ask you 3 questions. Is it normal and natural for people walking in a desert when they hear wind to think they're hearing God speak? Yeah, that's normal and natural. Sure, that could easily happen. Question number 2, do normal natural things happen more than once? Yeah, sure. Normal thing. I believe in the scientific method. Question number 3, a lot of people walk through deserts. Can you name one other religion ever in history that as a result of walking through a desert and hearing wind blow thought they heard God speak? Well, no. Well, then that's not natural. Well, I'll tell you what it was. It was a mass hysteria because they all left Egypt when they were running, and he saved their lives. They owed him. So, I never thought about that. Let me ask you a question. Is it normal and natural for a group of runaway slaves, right, to think that they hear God speaking because they have a charismatic leader? Yeah, that's normal and natural. That could easily happen. Question number 2, do normal and natural things happen more than once? Sure, I believe in scientific method. Question number 3, there have been a lot of runaway slaves in the last 5,000 years. And they always run into deserts because you don't run away into the city. And they're always led by somebody. Was there ever another group of runaway slaves who concluded that they all heard God speak? No. Well, then that's not normal and natural either. It turns out that no matter what explanation they give you, if they start to argue, yeah, that's normal and natural, then you'll ask, then why aren't there other religions in history that ever claimed a mass revelation? The fact that it never, ever happened besides the Jews means it's not normal and it's not natural.
One thing Rabbi Kellerman didn't mention is that not only is this entire conversation in the book of Deuteronomy, but it is pointing to this exact moment that we're in right now, with the Jews returned in the land and the rise of technology together with anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, that these are things that need to happen and that are happening right now as we speak. These things are happening. Let's read Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 25. When you have children and grandchildren who have been established in the land for a long time, you might become decadent and make a statue of some image, committing an evil act in the eyes of God, your Lord, and making him angry. I call heaven and earth as witness for you today that you will then quickly perish from the land that you are crossing the Jordan to occupy. You will not remain there very long. God is saying very clearly that the process of going from Mount Sinai to the land will not be the completion of this process. And in fact, we will be exiled because of our sins. God will then scatter you among the nations. So this part of the prophecy has already been fulfilled. And only a small number of you will remain among the nations to which God will lead you. There you will serve gods that men have made out of wood and stone, which cannot see, hear, eat, or smell. Then you will begin to seek God. So now there's a switch. We're in exile, we're worshiping idols, and then there's a repentance movement, a tshuva movement. If you pursue him with all your heart and soul, you will eventually find him. And God says there's a mission. Find God in exile. When you're in distress and all these things have happened to you. And that is what is happening today. We are at this place. You will finally return to God your Lord and obey him. You will repent. God your Lord is a merciful power. He will not abandon you. Don't think that once the Jews were exiled, they will not return. It's clearly in the book, that in the message that God gave to the Jewish people. He will not abandon you or destroy you. He will not forget the oath he made with upholding your father's covenant. So it's clear. But you might inquire about times long past, going back to the time that God created man on earth, exploring one end of the heavens to the other. This prediction that we will start space exploration and there'll be a scientific revolution that will cause people to question whether or not the authenticity of the Torah is true. You see, the Jews have returned in large numbers, and science has been discovering the galaxy. And we are asking this question. So in fact, these verses are us. Were written for exactly us today. See if anything as great as this has ever happened, or if the like has ever been heard. Has a nation ever heard God speaking out of fire as you have and still survived? There is no nation who ever heard God speak out of a fire and survived to tell about it. Has God ever done miracles, bringing one nation out of another with such great, tremendous miracles, signs, wonders, war, a mighty hand, an outstretched arm, and terrifying phenomena, as God did for you in Egypt before your very eyes? Egypt has not been duplicated. Nobody even made such a claim. You are the ones who have been shown. You are the witnesses. The very fact, like Isaiah says, Atem Edai, you are the witnesses. The very fact that we have survived despite all these things, exactly as it says in Deuteronomy. And you have been shown all these miracles so that you will know that God is supreme being and there is none besides him. From the heavens he let you hear his voice admonish you. On earth he showed you his great fire so that you heard his word come from fire. It was because he loved your fathers and chose their children after them that God himself brought you out of Egypt with his great power. And that brings us to today. If all these prophecies up to verse 38 have been fulfilled, when we read 38, 39, and 40, we will understand why those people in the media who are bent on delegitimizing Israel is not the problem. He will drive away before you nations that are greater and stronger than you, so as to bring you to their lands and give them to you as a heritage, as he is doing today. That is already halfway done. We've already got a large portion. Jerusalem is partially liberated. Realize it today, the verse continues in 39, Deuteronomy 4, and ponder it in your heart. God is the supreme being in heaven above and on the earth below. There is no other. Keep his decrees and commandments that I am presenting to you today. God says, follow the Torah, so that he will be good to you and your children after you, so that your children don't have to face anti-Semitism. Then you will endure for a long time in the land that God, your Lord, is giving to you for all time. La'olam. Noisin lecha kol hayomim. He's giving for all days. And that verse is the verse that brings this question. Because if we are the Jews and we have returned, and everything that has been predicted until now has happened exactly, they know that they need to delegitimize something. The Jews, the land, the nation. But God, he tells us not to worry. He says, follow my commandments. He will drive them away, nations that are greater and stronger than you, so as to bring you to their land. And when we build up Israel, God says, Baniti hanerasais. God says, I've built up these ruins. Ani Hashem dibarti va'asisi. I am God, I have spoken and I have done. And God rebuilding the land, God building up the land, is done through our actions. Thank you for watching. Have a good Yontif, good Shabbos. Please leave a comment. Let me know any questions. Shalom from just outside Jerusalem.